Good evening, everyone. This is Jacob Hornberger, and this is the Jacob Hornberger Show on the Internet. Nice to be back with y'all again this Saturday evening, 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock every week. I'm president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, in case we haven't met before. I'm going to talk tonight about the prerequisites for a free society. What is it? What does it take to get to be where we have a free society in America? And let me give you one of the prerequisites right off the bat, because I think it's possibly the most important one. And that is that people have to recognize that they're not free when they're living in an unfree society. You see, because if they think they're free when they're not really, then they have no incentive to break the chains of serfdom or slavery under which they're suffering. In fact, the problem is all too often that a slave who thinks he's free, who's convinced he's free, is grateful for his slavery because he thinks he's free. The guy who best phrased it in terms of what I think is the plight that faces the American people was the great German thinker Johann von Goethe. Goethe wrote that none are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And right there, that encapsulates the plight of the American people, that they honestly believe they're free. And in fact, many of them are grateful for this condition under which they live that they think is freedom, but of course, as we libertarians understand, is not freedom at all. Now, let me talk a little bit first about philosophy, just a little bit, and then take it over to specific policies that we have in this country, especially at the federal level, but also at the state level, to explain why it is that we're not free and analyze this problem of Americans thinking they're free when they're not really free, and again, being grateful for it. Now, libertarians believe that freedom means the right to live your life any way you choose, so long as your conduct is peaceful. That you should be free to accumulate unlimited amounts of money, to engage in enterprise free of government control or regulation. That means going out into the marketplace and offering your services, either as an owner of a business or an employee in a business, or a partnership, corporation, what have you, and accumulating the fruits of your earnings through those efforts. And then keeping the fruits of those efforts. I mean, it's your money, we say. It's your life, your talents, your abilities, your efforts. You should be free to keep your own money, all of it, and then decide what to do with it. And that means you might invest it, you might save it, you might donate it, you might hoard it under your mattress. Doesn't matter. It belongs to you. You want to go out and buy a house with it. You want to go out and buy beer with it. You want to go out and buy dope with it. You want to go to Europe on vacation. This is what freedom is all about. Now, that entails, by necessity, the right to engage in what others might consider to be very irresponsible things, very immoral things. We libertarians say that is the essence of freedom. That if you're not free to do the irresponsible thing, the immoral thing, as long as your conduct's peaceful, then you're not free at all. But let's face it, people in communist China are free to do the responsible thing, free to do the right thing, as that term is defined by the government. That's not freedom. The true test of a free society is the individual free to engage in irresponsible, immoral, unpopular conduct that everyone else disagrees with, everyone else condemns? Now, you can analyze this in terms of the area of free speech. That the test of a free society is not whether you can say what's popular or what's commonly accepted. The test of a free society is whether you can say what's unpopular, what's unacceptable to other people. When that unpopular speech is protected, then you know that that's a society that has freedom of speech. It's no different with respect to economic liberty, that people should be free to do what they want with their own money, spend it, donate it, hoard it, or not. If somebody doesn't want to donate Libertarians say that is his right. Now, of course, the statist feels totally different about this. He believes that the collective, the society, should decide what people do with their own money. That in fact, money should be nationalized, and let society, through the elected and appointed representatives, politicians, and bureaucrats, decide how the people's money is going to be distributed, and then let each individual have a dole, an allowance from the government. So everybody puts his money into a common pool. The government, distributes it out, doles it out to people it believes, are more deserving of it, representing, quote, society, and then gives back a little bit to each person who's producing it. Now, that's the statist concept of freedom. And, let's take, for example, the welfare state. I mean, we've all been born and raised in a welfare state, right? I mean, this is the condition under which we've been born and raised in this country, practically all of us. Now, what is this way of life? Well, it's a way of life in which the government takes money from people, most people, collects it through the Internal Revenue Service, and then decides how it's going to dole out this money to particular people. The most good example of the best example of this is Social Security. I mean, this is the crown jewel of the welfare state. Yes, I know what people say, that I put it in and I got a right to take it out. Well, that's just delusionary. It's just not dealing with reality. The reality is that Social Security is simply, tax. It's tax like any other tax, income tax, food tax, whatever. They tax the young and the productive, and then they give the money to the elderly. It's just a straight confiscate and redistribute program. Now, those that are in their 60s and 70s now, those that are on the Social Security dole, yes, they had their money taxed from them, and it was spent partly on Social Security recipients who are all dead now, partly on other things, maybe some wars or whatever. But that money's all gone. Now what's happening is a repeat. So when the Social Security recipient says, well, I put it in, I got to have a right to take it out, what he's really saying is that, look, I had my money stolen from me from people who are now dead, and now I'm going to do exactly what they're doing. I'm going to support this program where I'm going to take from the young and the productive. And of course, the young people in this country are having a horrible time starting out in life, trying to make a living and so forth. But the old people say, nah, put the burden on them. Doesn't matter. Those dead people did it to me, and now I'm going to do it to them because it's my right. But what's important to realize here is it's a straight confiscate and redistribute program. Same with Medicare, same with Medicaid. That here is the money that's being taken from one group of people to pay for the health care costs of another group of people. Now, what's important to remember about this is okay, there's two sides of this. There is the recipient side, and there is the taxpayer side. Because, a lot of people think that, the government's just like a business, like in the private sector. You got all these businesses in the private sector, and people are engaging in enterprise and accumulating wealth and deciding what to do with it, and that government's just another player in all this. That it's engaging in enterprise, it's accumulating wealth, it's trying to decide what to do with its money. Nothing could be more delusionary or further from reality. What the government is in a totally different category. You've got two entities here. You've got the government, and then you've got the private sector. And the private sector is what produces the wealth, and then what the government sector does is it takes that wealth and puts it into its own pockets and then doles it out. So the government's not producing its own wealth. In a sense, it's like the parasite. The parasite grabs onto the host and starts sucking blood and thrives off the host. That's the public government sector. If there was no private sector, there would be nothing for the parasite to suck off of. So the government is getting its money through taxes, which is, of course, force, because if you don't pay your taxes, they will come after you. They will put liens on your property. They will sell your property at foreclosure sales. They'll deliver the property to someone else. And if you resist any of these efforts with force, they will meet you with force. And you'll end up either in jail or 6 feet under in the cemetery, because they will kill you if you resist arrest with violence. They will meet violence with violence. So the government, uses taxes, or it borrows the money from the private sector, but of course that money has to be paid back. And how is it paid back? Through taxes. And so this whole process is based on force. Now, the recipients of this largesse, they think they're free because of this. You see, and you often hear, people saying this, is that, you have more freedom when you're on the dole because you have more options what to do with your money. In other words, let's assume a person is making, $5,000 a year. By giving him the dole of, let's say, another $5,000, the state says, we've increased his freedom because he has more options on what to do with that, second $5,000. Well, that's just nonsense. That's just a perverted, warped sense of the word freedom. That actually what's happening is that the dole recipient, when he starts receiving his dole, he becomes, a ward of the government. I mean, he becomes under the control of the government. The government now has him. I mean, it's like the government's got him on a leash, like a little pet. And when the government wants to tighten that leash, you can tighten the leash. I mean, this is the dependency that comes with the welfare state. And it has a remarkable effect on people. It weakens people. It weakens the moral fiber of a person. It weakens their spirit because they know that they are now dependent on the government and subject to the control of the government. And it inevitably alters people's behavior, because once people become dependent on the dole, they get very, very frightened that the dole could be terminated. And inevitably what happens over time is that you've got a society of citizens, that many of whom that are on the dole, that they start acting like children. Their relationship with the government is one of a child and an adult. That even though they may be, let's say, 50 years old, when they're confronting the government, they feel like a little kid. That this is their daddy or this is their mommy. I mean, this is why libertarians say that the welfare state, which is really a socialist state, because it's taking money from one group of people and giving it to another group of people, can also be called the paternalistic state, or the paternalistic welfare state, or if you like, the maternalistic welfare state, because people are looking at government as their daddy or their mommy that's providing them their retirement. And it's free. You see, it's free, that the government is paying my retirement. I don't have to work anymore. I just get a free check and it's all free. Well, it's not free. For one thing, somebody's paying for it, the young and the productive. They can't buy a house, or they can't start a family, or they can't move out of their parents' homes because they can't afford it, because they're paying all these huge number of taxes to support, all the welfare programs, and of course all the warfare programs, and we'll talk about that too. But the recipient, what we need to remember here is that the recipient is not free in any sense of the term when the government's got him under control. And the government will keep him under control. There's a famous Supreme Court case where the court stated something to the effect that it is hardly lack of due process for the government to regulate that which it subsidizes. So with the subsidy, with the dole, inevitably comes strings and controls. And that's how they keep an entire society of people, cowed and dependent and passive. Because, how many people are going to get out there and fundamentally challenge government at a fundamental level when they know the daddy may cut them off. I mean, that's a frightening thing for a child. I mean, think of a little child that's 8 or 9 years old. All right, he may throw a tantrum. He may complain about how strict his parents are and so forth, but he's not going to challenge his daddy or his mommy at a real fundamental level because he knows his survival depends. He instinctively knows that his survival depends on his parents. That's the way the dole recipient feels with respect to the government. That this is his daddy, this is his mommy, that and inculcated in his mind is that he could never survive without the dole. And we see that happening now that we've had, 4 generations of people that have grown up under the welfare state, that have come to expect their Social Security and their Medicare and Medicaid, and actually think it's a right. I mean, there's actually this sense of, I have a right to get into other people's pocketbooks. And just, I don't care what it does. I don't care if it bankrupts this country. That's not my problem. I have a right to it. That those people have become, weak, dependent towards the government. They're not about to challenge the government at a fundamental level on, let's say, the foreign wars or the torture or Guantanamo or whatever. They're going to align themselves most of the time with the government because this is their daddy. And it's a perfect strategy. I mean, the dole recipient thinks, oh, the government officials love me. That's why they're doing this. That's why they're sending me a free check. And I don't mean to just pick on the Social Security and the Medicare and the Medicaid recipients. I mean, we've got the education grant people. We got the foreign dictators. Don't forget that they're on welfare too. That's what foreign aid is. It's welfare for the dictators and other regimes. You've got the education grants. You got the local politicians; they get their grants too. I mean, you've got an entire society of people that are dependent on the government, and so they look on government as their daddy. Oh, please don't cut me off my dole. And worst of all, they convince themselves that they could never survive without the dole. I mean, that's the saddest part of this whole thing. I mean, you go to a Social Security recipient, you say, hey, will you help us repeal this program? It's immoral, it's evil, it's destructive. We should never have adopted it back in the 1930s when Roosevelt, the statist par excellence, came into power and revolutionized American life. And the dole recipient just goes bananas. I mean, I could never survive without my Social Security. I could never survive without my Medicare, with my education grants, with my, foreign aid, without my farm subsidies, corporate bailouts. I mean, let's face it. You've got an entire society of dependent people and people who believe they have a right to take money from other people through the power of the state. This is the statist concept of freedom. I mean, the statist believes that people are free and freer the more the government is giving them money. Well, we libertarians say, no, it's the exact opposite. You destroy the freedom of that person. You destroy his ability to make it in life on his own, to get out there in that marketplace and accumulate wealth and engage in enterprise. And all you've done is you've licensed him to steal. I mean, let's face it, a thief that goes out and, let's say, steals $5,000 from somebody in an alley, I mean, how many people would say, oh, well, he's freer now because he's got that extra money? I mean, we never make that argument. A lawyer would never have the audacity to make that argument in court because there's the moral argument. Or take another example. Sometimes we libertarians are asked, well, what would you do about the welfare state? And we'd say, just repeal it. Just repeal it immediately. And the state says, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I mean, you've got to do it gradually. And of course, you got all these reform plans for Social Security, public schooling, foreign aid, Medicare. Everybody's got his favorite reform plan, medical IRAs, medical vouchers, Social Security vouchers, raise the retirement age, all that nonsense. Well, if they caught an embezzler embezzling money, how many of them would say, well, the poor embezzler, he's dependent on the money, he can't make it, let's go ahead and phase out his embezzlement over a 5-year, 10-year period, or maybe 40-year period like they want to do with Social Security and Medicare or something. Well, nobody would do that because of the moral principle. It's wrong to embezzle. And the embezzler will just have to do without that money that doesn't belong to him. Well, the same moral principle applies to the welfare state and to the entire dole society. Now, okay, that's the recipient side. But what about the taxpayer side? How free is he when he's having his money taken from him? I mean, you go to a young person that, let's say, is pulling in 40 grand a year, and he's finding out that he's paying $15,000 in income taxes and Social Security taxes, that Medicare taxes, that are all going to fund the welfare state and the warfare state. That's $13,000 that he doesn't get to provide for his family. Maybe that he'd like to get married but can't afford it. Maybe he'd like to get an apartment. Well, that $13,000 would sure come in handy for some of those expenses. In fact, think about how much you've paid in income taxes and Social Security taxes and so forth for the past 10 years. I mean, the Future of Freedom Foundation has been in existence 21 years. We've been calling for these libertarian solutions for 21 years. Now, let's just assume that 10 years ago, people had finally started saying, you guys at FFF are right. We're going to adopt a libertarian society here in the United States. We're going to reject the socialism, the interventionism, the fascism, the imperialism of the welfare warfare state of the conservatives and liberals, and we're going to embrace libertarianism. Well, what's the average person paid, in all these taxes? Let's just say it's $20,000 a year. Now, what does that add up to? I mean, the last 10 years, multiply that times 20,000. That would mean that you would have in your pockets, assuming that you fell in that category, $200,000. Now, that's a considerable amount of money. I mean, that can pay for health care insurance. It can pay for health care costs, child's education, at least a large portion of it. Vacation, a down payment on a home, that's 200 grand. Okay, it's all been frittered away. And so how can they possibly say that the person who's having to pay for this is free in any meaningful sense of the word? But they do. They say that the states say that because people are participating in society, that this is a privilege, that this is what was the term I heard the other night? Social contract. If you can believe that somehow or another that there's a contract that's been entered into socially where everybody just has to agree to give up their income and have it doled out by the IRS into the hands of all these dole recipients. Well, that's just idiotic. I mean, did you sign a contract? I mean, usually a contract's in writing. Or you can have oral contracts. I never agreed to that kind of contract. What that person's really saying is that the majority's going to rule, that there's no such thing as fundamental rights. There's no such thing as the fundamental right to own your own money, decide how to live your own life, what to do with your own money. The majority's going to rule, and the minority's just going to have to succumb to the rule of the majority. Well, libertarians say nonsense. We don't do that in free speech. We don't put that up to a majority vote and say, well, nobody's going to be able to read, unpopular books now, or churches. We don't do that in religion. We don't say everybody's going to have to send their kids to church because the majority wants it. And libertarians say, well, you can't do that economically either. That a person's got a right to do with his own money what he wants. Now, keep in mind that the American people subscribed to this libertarian philosophy with respect to taxes and the welfare state for more than 100 years. I mean, there was no income tax. Imagine that in this country for more than 100 years. No welfare state, no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, public schooling, foreign aid, all the welfare, farm subsidies, corporate bailouts, none of this welfare state junk. Why? Because our American ancestors, despite the fact that they had tremendous exceptions in their society, we all know what they were. The slavery was the biggest. There was also tariffs. There was land grants. There was, the privileges to the corporations. Okay, we all know that. But when you look at the positive side, and that is the sense that to a certain sector of people, they pointed the way to what freedom means. And part of that freedom was no income tax. You keep everything you earn, you decide what to do with it. You're not going to be forced to honor your mother and father through Social Security. You're not going to be forced to take care of your own retirement. You're going to make these decisions on your own. Whether you provide for your parents, if they need help, many elderly people are wealthy enough to handle it on their own. But if truly destitute people, this is what having children is all about. It's also what community values are all about. If children don't help, that's where church groups come in, and that's where voluntary groups in. Groups like the March of Dimes or the Jerry Lewis Telethon or United Way and so forth. This is the only kind of help that's meaningful, especially in a Christian sense. It just boggles my mind whenever I hear any Christian defending a system based on Caesar using his coercive powers to force someone to give to someone else. I don't see how you could find a more clear-cut violation of free will, the great gift that God gave us of free will, of forcing somebody to care for somebody else, including his parents. This is supposed to be voluntary. It's supposed to be coming out of your heart, and that's the only charity that has any meaning to it, especially in a religious sense. So this is the idea of a free society in a libertarian sense. This is the type of free society envisioned by our nation's founding fathers, because they were trying to establish, notwithstanding the exceptions, a free society. And part of that free society they understood was no taxation on income. Now, it's interesting that people today say, oh, but I live in a free society. Oh, really? Well, then what did our ancestors live under? Let's take the period from 1870 to 1890. There was no slavery there, but there were still lots of exceptions on economic liberty, no question about it. But here was a society with no income tax, no welfare state, no Medicare, no Medicaid, no public schooling, no Federal Reserve, no drug wars, no gun control. What kind of society was that? And that really boggles their mind, because they don't want to say, well, our American ancestors at that time lived under an unfree society. No, but the point is you got opposites now. And we have had opposites for almost a century. We've got one way of life in which people are free to keep everything they earn, decide what to do with their own money. You've got another way of life that's the exact opposite, where the entire collective confiscates the wealth and distributes it out to the privileged people, whoever they choose to should receive the money. In fact, notice that under the system under which we live, and we've all been born and raised, effectively the government has nationalized everybody's income. That's really how it plays out here. That the income tax nationalized income. Everybody's income belongs to the government, because all they have to do is just change the percentage. Sometimes they're nice and they make the percentage 25% or 30% or 40%. But they have the power to go all the way up to 99%. That's the point, is that the role of the master and servant got inverted when the income tax came into existence. So effectively, the government nationalizes income, and then by setting the percentage that you're permitted to keep, that's your allowance. In other words, the more honest system would be everybody sends 100% of his money. He has 100% withholding on all your paycheck, and the self-employed people have to send all their money to the government, and then they send you back your particular allotment. Well, that's exactly the kind of system we have today, because they regulate the percentage. That's totally different from the kind of society our ancestors lived. And they could keep everything they earned, and there wasn't anything the government could do about it. Nothing. Because there just wasn't any income tax. So that's the difference. But you see, Americans believe they're free. They thank the troops for defending their freedoms, or that popular song, "Thank God I'm an American, because at least I know I'm free." And they really know they're free, which makes them the most enslaved slave of all. That's what Goethe was pointing out. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And that's the big challenge we have as libertarians. The first challenge is to, open people's eyes, or, induce them to open their own eyes, to realize that, oh my gosh, The welfare state is not freedom, it's socialism. I mean, look, if you go to Cuba today, I mean, most Americans, if you ask them, are people in Cuba free? They're, oh, no, 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 that's a communist country. That's a socialist country. Well, I've been to Cuba. And I was fascinated. I was walking around downtown Havana. Guess what? They got a Department of Education, a Department of Health Care, and I'm sure they got a Department of Social Security. I didn't see it, but they have it because they have Social Security. They have Medicare. They have Medicaid. They have national health care. They have public schooling, free, all the way through college. They have income taxation. They have licensure laws. They've got it all. But you see, that's part and parcel of their socialist system, their control system. This is part of how the government controls everybody. It's not just restraints on free speech. It's not just restraints on civil liberties in Cuba. It's not just restraints on religious activity. It is total control over people's economic activity. And the average Cuban walking down the street, he knows it. He knows that this is socialism under which he's suffering. He doesn't like it. I mean, I talk to a lot of people out on the street. They don't like their socialist system at all. But in a sense, they are freer than Americans are because, you see, they know that they're living under socialism. The average American says, I live in a free enterprise country. I'm a free enterprise kind of person. I believe in the Chamber of Commerce. I mean, right? Isn't that the way the average American talks? That, oh, thank God, for the troops. The troops are defending my freedom. Because he believes he's free. He believes that all this welfare statism, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education grants, IRS, it's all freedom. And, of course, notwithstanding the fact that the IRS is one of the most terrorizing, terrifying agencies in history. I mean, the abuse that it does on people, the arrogance. This is how many people have they driven to suicide in the IRS? And people say, oh, no, this is freedom. This is freedom. Well, this is nonsense, as libertarians say. So the first prerequisite is people have got to realize that the welfare state is not freedom. Now, you look at the drug war. I mean, here's another classic example of where, you couldn't probably find a better example of a violation of the principles of freedom. I mean, and this guy I heard the other day, I think it was on Judge Napolitano's show, he was defending drug laws by using this term, the social contract. Well, we have a social contract in which, the bad drugs are not going to be promoted in society or sold in society. I mean, this is such, how can anybody talk in such idiotic terms? The social contract? What does that mean? I mean, where's this contract? No, really, what he's saying, and this is the mindset of the statist, he's saying is that the majority is going to decide what people are going to be free to ingest. And if the majority says no sugar or no fatty foods because people are getting obese, or no marijuana, and no heroin, no alcohol, booze, which they did 50, 60 years ago, no tobacco, which they'd love to do, that's just it. That's what he calls a social contract. Well, whatever he calls it, it's not freedom. Now, he believes he's free. There's no doubt in my mind that if you were to ask that guy that used that term social contract and you said, hey, dude, do you live in a free society? I'm proud to be an American because at least I know I'm free. I mean, that's what he'd say. But it's idiotic. But he exemplifies, and most people do, except libertarians. They exemplify Goethe's observation. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. And so, here you have a person sitting in the privacy of his own home saying, I'm going to smoke dope tonight, or I'm going to snort cocaine, or I'm going to inject heroin. Now, we can sit here and say, this isn't very healthy. This really isn't a good idea. We can sit there and preach to anybody, just like we can do with an alcoholic. We can have an intervention, and we can say, hey, this you really need to go into detox and so forth. But that's totally different from calling the state, the daddy, call him the daddy, and say, go arrest him, which of course a lot of people do because you got a lot of narcs in society. Go arrest him and send him to his room in a penitentiary. And again, you've got this little daddy-child thing going on. And yet people say, oh, of course I'm free. I'm free because the government's taking care of me. It's protecting me from the drug dealers, and it's taking care of me with my Medicare and my Medicaid and my Social Security. It's going to do all kind of wonderful things. I got education being paid for, and it's covering my food stamps. And oh, wow, it just bailed out my corporation. And well, this is just nonsense. And of course, the country's going bankrupt because of all this, right? I mean, we all know that. The country's going bankrupt. The welfare state's cratering in along with the warfare state. Government spending is out of control. They're going to lift the debt ceiling again. We all know they're going to do that. It's the biggest fraud I've ever seen. I mean, why do they even have a ceiling if they're going to raise it every time? It's really not a ceiling. Just get rid of it and be honest about it that you're going to spend whatever money you want. And they're going to be borrowing. And of course, there's the Federal Reserve. I mean, how is that consistent with a free society? When they're out there stealing from people by just debasing the currency, just paying off the government's bills by printing the money. But it's a perfect scam because people say, oh, it's the oil companies, it's the oil companies, despite the fact that every commodity in the world is soaring, gold, silver, pork bellies, I mean, everything. But it's, oh, the oil companies, oh, the oil, because nobody wants to get there and criticize daddy. And the Federal Reserve is part of daddy. I mean, that's a part of the government. I mean, that's its purpose, to debase the currency, to monetize the debt, and enable government to spend out its gazoo for the welfare. Remember, somebody's got to pay for this. And inflation, what the Federal Reserve is doing is just inflating the currency. That's a tax in a way. I mean, somebody's got to pay for it in those rising prices. And, of course, everybody's paying for it, including the poor at that gas pump. And yet, what do the states say? We live in a free society. Golly, I'm so glad that I'm an American because at least I know I'm free. I mean, this is the big obstacle, that people honestly think they're free. Now, why is this so important? Well, because if people figure out they're not free, then it changes the terms of the debate. Then we got to start debating, well, do you want to stay like that? Do you want to stay a serf or a slave? And then now we start getting down to reality. Somebody may say, I love socialism. I don't care if I'm not free. I don't care if I'm a dependent ward of the state. I don't care if my income's been nationalized. I don't care if the Federal Reserve is stealing from me. I don't care. I just want to be taken care of, and that's all that matters to me. And okay, fine, all right. I mean, you know, at least you're dealing with reality here as compared to, oh no, I live in a free society. The welfare state's freedom. The more the government takes care of me, I'm free, I'm free. Oh, when the government's protecting me from drug dealers, I'm free, I'm free. You know, that's just delusionary talk. So, you know, the first thing people have to figure out is, you know what? This whole system that Roosevelt brought into existence, the daddy state, the paternalistic state, the socialist state, the welfare state, this ain't consistent with the founding principles of this country, and it's not consistent with the principles of freedom. And then let's start having a real debate. Hey, you know, do you want to be free? Now, then part of this is believing in yourself and believing in freedom. This is the other obstacle. This is a prerequisite to freedom. One, you got to recognize you're not free. Two, you got to want to be free. And three, you got to believe in yourself. You got to believe in freedom. You got to believe that you can do it on your own. You can do it with others, in cooperation with others in the marketplace. That includes voluntary charity. I mean, this is where self-esteem and belief in others. You got to believe in other people too. You can't. I mean, how many people have I heard say, "Well, Jacob, you know, we just can't cut off all this welfare state all at once because nobody would help other people out that really need help." And this was a talk show host that was telling me this latest one a while back. And I said, well, why are you so selfish that you wouldn't help anybody? And he says, oh, no, I wasn't talking about me. Oh, no, I'm a good person. I would certainly help out others. It's everyone else that won't. Well, if you add up every single person that says that he's a good person but everybody else isn't, you got, you know, probably about 250 million people right there, you know. But this is the idea. You got to believe in yourself. You've got to believe in others. You've got to believe in the market process. You've got to believe in free markets. I mean, those of us that are religious, you can believe in God. You put your faith in God on the travails and trials that we face in life. But you don't look to the daddy, you don't look to Caesar, you don't look to coercion, you don't look to force to get yourself out of these fixes. Now, where does all this come from, this mindset that, hey, we're free, we're free, we're free? Well, that's been the big success of government schooling, or, what's commonly known as public schooling. And I include in that government licensed schools, which are most private schools. I mean, we often hear of the big disaster that public schooling is, and it is a disaster in terms of the love of learning that they just burn out of kids' minds, that a kid, you see them from 0 to 6, and man, they've got these wide eyes. They're just in awe of the universe. They're absorbing everything. I mean, and they love to learn, why. That's their favorite, word, why, that bedevils every parent. But by the time they finish the 12-year sentence in public government schools, they get out of there, they hate to learn, they hate education, they hate everything about school. I mean, so it's been a disaster, in terms of what they've done to kids, the damage they've done to kids' minds and spirit and self-esteem. But the big success has been the indoctrination. You're free, you're free, you're free. You live in a free country. Pledge allegiance, and of course they're never going to teach them that the Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist. They're going to say it was written by a free enterprise person. And it's the same thing with like Franklin Roosevelt. They're never going to tell school kids that the Federal Reserve caused the Great Depression, the big stock market crash in '29. They're not going to tell kids that. They're going to tell them free enterprise failed. They're not going to tell kids that Franklin Roosevelt revolutionized the economic system to turn it into a socialist, fascist, interventionist one. No, they're going to say he saved free enterprise. And this is the power of government school, and this has been success of it. And so kids, by the time they graduate, they may hate to learn, they may hate education, and they may know how to memorize and all this, but they're going to sit there and say, we're free, I live in a free country, thank goodness the government's taking care of people, because that's what freedom's all about. I read in the paper the other day where these kids were saying, well, they're not kids anymore, well, yeah, to a certain extent, but they're teenagers, I guess, and they were saying that on 9/11, boy, they learned what patriotism was all about. They would go to school and do the Pledge of Allegiance every day, and they hadn't been doing it before, and they came to realize how important, the government is in their lives. And, this is their concept of patriotism. I mean, in other words, don't do any critical thinking. Don't ask what was the U.S. foreign policy leading up to 9/11. What was the U.S. government doing in the Middle East prior to that time? What was it doing to generate anger and hatred that boiled over during that period of time, after 1989, when they lost the Soviet Union as an official enemy? What was the military doing? What was the State Department doing from 1989 all the way to 2001? They're not going to ask those kind of questions. All they're going to do is sit there and pledge allegiance and thank the troops for defending our freedoms. All right, that's been the big success, and that's the real crux of the problem here, is that's where people get this mindset that they're free and they're thankful for the welfare state and the warfare state. Because in their minds, this empire, now let's transcend a little bit into the warfare state part of this, that people are convinced that the warfare state under which we've all been born and raised is freedom too. I mean, here we have this gigantic empire, right? I mean, we've got bases all over the world, 700 to 1,000 military bases all over the world. And you've got foreign aid going into the coffers of dictators, all through the Middle East, but around the world. It's not just the Middle East. This government's been supporting dictators for the last umpteen years to the tune of billions and billions of dollars. Just in the Middle East, Bahrain, Yemen, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq. I mean, don't forget, remember that Saddam Hussein was a partner, was an ally of the U.S. government, just like the Shah of Iran was. Pinochet in Chile. You got the military dictatorships in Guatemala that they installed. And yet people see all this and it's ingrained in them. This is freedom. The empire is freedom, because they don't want to see it's an empire. They're still operating under the delusion that this is a republic. Now, we libertarians favor a republic. We think the founding fathers had it right when they established a republic. You know, they had a very limited government with no standing army, no big navy, no going abroad in search of monsters to destroy, as John Quincy Adams put it. They said, we're not going to send troops abroad. We're not going to have overseas military bases. We're not going to have militarism in this country. Why? Because they wanted a free society. And in their minds, in the minds of libertarians, this empire junk, this militarism junk, is anti-freedom. But you see, that's the problem, is that the standard statist, the average American, he believes this is all freedom. He's over there thanking the troops for defending his freedom. It never occurs to him that what the troops are doing over there is anti-freedom, that it's pro-imperial, pro-empire, that an empire is contrary to the principles of freedom. And look at the damage it's caused. I mean, you look at the anger and rage. You hear the government throughout from '89 when they lost their official enemy, the Soviet Union. They never had communism. You know, the Cold War would have justified the national security state, the garrison state, the warfare state, the Cold War, Vietnam War, Korean War. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. And what does this have to do with freedom, you see? I mean, this goes back to what I've been saying from the very start of this program, that the libertarian sees the federal government as the biggest threat to our freedom and to our well-being. The statists, liberals and conservatives, they see the federal government as their daddy, as their buddy, as their big brother, you see? And so it never occurs to them that anything the federal government is doing is anti-freedom. Everything in their mind that the federal government does, their daddy, their mommy, is protecting their freedom, taking care of them, providing for them. And so when the government was out there doing those horrible things throughout the 90s, it was getting people so angry. You know, the Persian Gulf intervention, which killed, I don't know, a couple 100,000 people in Iraq. Then they destroyed the water and sewage facilities with a specific intent to pass, infectious illnesses and diseases among the Iraqi people. You had the sanctions that lasted 11 years that killed hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children. You had Madeleine Albright, the official ambassador of the United States. She's a spokesman for the U.S. government. She goes to the United Nations. She's the UN ambassador. And she says to 60 Minutes, that the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children are worth it. And what did she mean by worth it? Worth the effort to get rid of Saddam Hussein, because by this time they had a falling out with their former partner and ally, which they do with a lot of these dictatorial guys. That, they don't toe a particular line, and so the empire turns on them. And so there was the sanctions, which were willing to sacrifice any number of children, any number of Iraqis really, to get rid of Saddam. They didn't succeed. But the anger boiled over. Now, of course, there were some of us that were saying, this is wrong. This is bad. But the statist, he's saying, don't criticize our daddy. Our daddy has access to information that we don't have. This is national security, blah, 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 blah. You see, it's this deference to daddy that precludes him, because they'll cut off their dole. That's what they're so scared of. That's where the welfare state and the warfare state integrate. That don't say anything about the warfare state, the wars of aggression, the undeclared wars. Don't get out and demonstrate against the government like people in the Middle East are doing, because the daddy will cut off the dole. In fact, one of the most amusing aspects of this Middle East situation is where the dictators, to try to quell the disturbances, are offering increased dole payments, increased welfare. I mean, don't you just love it? Where do they learn this? Of course, from the U.S. That you give people more dole, more welfare, that'll quiet them down. It'll make them more dependent. They'll be grateful to their daddy. And they won't say anything about all the corruption and crookedness and the largesses going into the government coffers. Well, so then it boils over. You get the 93 attack on the World Trade Center. You get the attack on the USS Cole. You get the attacks on the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. And there were some of us that were saying, you got to stop this, because otherwise these terrorist attacks are going to reach a U.S. soil. This is before 9/11. We were writing articles on this. So was Chalmers Johnson. If you haven't read his great book, Blowback, I highly recommend it, because he was saying these things before 9/11 also, that we're going to see a terrorist attack on U.S. soil because of U.S. foreign policy. The bad things the U.S. government was doing, well, around the world, but particularly in the Middle East. And I've just mentioned a few. There were others. You know, the humiliation, the abuse. So there's a faction, it boils over in the anger and rage. They do these attacks. They culminate in 9/11. What does the government do? The government goes out and does the same thing it's been doing. The sanctions hadn't worked for 11 years, so they used 9/11 as the excuse to finally get rid of Saddam. You know, that was a regime change operation. They go into Afghanistan, regime change operation. Of course, they never catch bin Laden. And people forget that after a while, bin Laden was irrelevant. And Bush himself said it. Hey, we're not interested in bin Laden after all. We're just going to be here fighting terrorism. And, you know, most of the people they've killed in Afghanistan had nothing to do with 9/11. And now, but although the survivors of those people are angry, that rage is still boiling over. I mean, at least they're admitting that the killing of bin Laden is creating a lot of anger and rage. That's why they don't want to release the photos. I mean, it would have been horrible if they'd have said what they said after 9/11. Oh no, we're going to get retaliation because people hate us for our freedom and values. No, and let's it's the killing of so many people, especially the people that had nothing to do with 9/11. I mean, that's what we were saying from the very beginning. Go after bin Laden the way that this country went after Ramzi Youssef and the other people that were involved in the 93 bombing attack. Now, of course, that doesn't get to the root of things. The root of the things is the U.S. foreign policy. You got to pull that weed out by its root to stop the anger and the rage. But, okay, if you want the empire, you wanted doing all these bad things, be expecting there's going to be retaliation. But with Youssef in 93, they didn't attack Pakistan where the guy was holed up. They didn't attack Afghanistan. They didn't kill hundreds of thousands of people that had nothing to do with that 93 attack. They just waited him out. And they finally found him in a house, the same way they found bin Laden in a house there in Pakistan. They had good intelligence. They surrounded the house. They went in. They arrested him. They brought him back to the U.S. He's now serving a life prison term in the federal penitentiary. No big anger. No, people didn't lose wedding parties and brothers and sisters and parents. I mean, I just saw her, this little girl in the paper today. A photograph of her, like when she was 7 or 8. You know, with this scream of horror on her, this look of horror on her face, because her parents had just been shot by U.S. troops while they were driving their car. They didn't do anything wrong. They just shot them. You know, one of those unfortunate accidents. And now this little girl's like 17 or something like that. And she's living with her uncle or something like this. I mean, it's just a horrifying situation. That didn't happen in 93. They just used good intelligence. They went after him. And that's what we libertarians have been saying. That's what you should have done with bin Laden. That you should never have militarized this problem, because all you've done is now you've created a perpetual war. And as Madison said, you know, war is the health. No, William Randolph Bourne said war is the health of the state. Madison said, of all the enemies to liberty, war is the biggest. I mean, war is the biggest because that's where power is centralized. This is where crises happen and opportunities for more power happen. And of course, we've seen it. I mean, we've got the Homeland Security, we got the Patriot Act, we got the Enemy Combatant Doctrine, we got the TSA. I mean, the ultimate irony in this is that the dictators in the Middle East are exercising the same powers, emergency powers, that the president here now has under the so-called war on terrorism, post 9/11. And the people in the Middle East are demanding that those powers be lifted. Over here in the U.S., what are people saying? Freedom. Freedom. This is all freedom. The Patriot Act is freedom. The illegal spying by the NSA, freedom. They're protecting our freedom. The TSA searches are to protect our freedom. The Enemy Combatant Doctrine, which they're now using to assassinate, they just assassinated bin Laden instead of taking him into custody. They now have tried to assassinate an American. So when Americans say, oh, it's only the terrorists, nonsense. They have the power to assassinate Americans under the Enemy Combatant Doctrine, to torture Americans. And everybody's lulled in this sense of complacency of saying, well, gosh, they're not rounding people up like they're doing in Syria, like they do in Iran. That's missing the point. The point is they have the powers now. That's what's underneath the surface right here. All they need is a good crisis. And the courts have held that they now have the power under this emergency of 9/11. The same kind of emergencies, 10, 11 years after the emergency, they still have the powers. I mean, okay, it's not as bad as the 30-year emergency or the 50-year emergency in some of those Middle East dictatorships. But 10 or 11 years, that's ridiculous. And they're still in Afghanistan, they're still killing people. They're still in Iraq, still killing people. They've expanded the killing to Libya, to Yemen. Wouldn't surprise me if they expanded to Bahrain, to Syria. And where is this in their benefit? Because the crises, terrorist blowback. Now we kill this terrorist. 10 more terrorists are now angry at us. Okay, we killed those 10. 100 more are now angry at us. This thing is a dream come true for the statist. This war on terrorism is a dream. It's better than the Cold War. It's better than the communist threat. And this takes away our freedom. But the statist says that is freedom. Well, it's not freedom. I mean, that's the reason why the framers and our ancestors put these restrictions on civil liberties, on infringements on civil liberties into the Bill of Rights. We have habeas corpus in the Constitution. We have due process of law and unreasonable searches and seizures and right to counsel, right to jury trial. I mean, this is what goes to a free society, is stopping the government from doing this. So what do we have to do here? Well, okay, we've got to bring people's attention to the fact that this ain't a free society, this welfare warfare state. That our ancestors were on the right track, notwithstanding the big exceptions, and we've got to reflect on those principles. So, forget this reform. I often hear people say, we got to reform the welfare state. We got to reform it. I got a plan. I got a plan. I mean, I'm so tired of hearing plans to save Social Security and reform Medicare and reform Medicaid and reform foreign aid and education grants and corporate bailouts and stimulus plans. What we need to do is dismantle this. I mean, remember I talked about moral principles in the beginning? If it's wrong to take what doesn't belong to you and give it to someone else, well, then it's got to be stopped. It's just stopped. That's the whole idea of moral principles. If it's morally wrong, you don't countenance it for even any length of time. That you dismantle these things, you repeal them. They were enacted, and everybody knows that people have a right to repeal them, just like any other law. You repeal Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and you believe in yourselves. You believe in the markets. You believe in others. You believe in the power of private charity, including among the doctors and the physicians that are, of course, so disgusted with this whole socialist system. And then on the warfare side, you dismantle this whole warfare state, the whole empire business, the troops abroad, the killing of people over and over and over again. You dismantle this perpetual war. You bring all the troops home. You close all those bases overseas. You discharge the troops into the private sector. You get rid of all this militarism of the standing army, the military-industrial complex, and all the taxes and the Federal Reserve printing of the money that's needed to pay for all this. I mean, this solves all the fiscal problems. I mean, all of a sudden, now you're talking about a strong society because you've got a strong economic base. You've got all these public sector people, both in the welfare side and the warfare side, that are now in the private sector producing wealth instead of sucking the wealth out of the private sector. All the private sector people that were having to pay taxes to fund all this stuff, they're now being able to keep their own money. So you've got this doubly positive effect. That's how you get a strong nation, when you've got a really strong private sector with a very weak limited government republic. Then if anybody jacks with you, they try to invade your country, occupy your country, everybody comes to the forefront to defend freedom voluntarily, because it's not involved in some foreign war where they got to force people to go fight those things. And you've got a much bigger industrial base to battle it, where all of a sudden you can convert industries and businesses over to the production of weaponry and whatever is necessary for genuine defense. So the bottom line really is libertarianism is really the answer to this thing. I mean, this country's mired in economic woes, terrorism woes, foreign policy woes, welfare state woes. There's only one real solution, and that's libertarianism. That's the show for this week. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week. Good night.